Well, welcome back, everyone. We hope you enjoyed the movement with Megan and the meditation with Naomi, or you just took your a self-directed break. Just as it is important to support our work in mental health promotion, it is as important that we nourish and care for ourselves. So it is with great pleasure that we introduce the upcoming panel titled Maximizing the Impact of Knowledge. At the KDE Hub, we vision momentum occurring at multiple levels and in synergy. Knowledge creation occurs at the practice, research, and policy levels. And to leverage the intersection of all three allows for maximum impact for multiple groups of individuals and communities. But in reality, how do we do this? So what we are going to do next is to hear from leaders within the field of research policy and practice. Dr. Claire Bettker will facilitate this discussion in a fireside chat format. So it's with pleasure I'm going to introduce Dr. Claire Bettker, Scientific Director, National Collaborating Center for Determinants of Health. A registered nurse by training, Claire brings specific expertise to her role with a focus on knowledge translation activities. She brings a wealth of expertise, rich networks, and a passion to translate knowledge and evidence, especially to position mental health to advance health equity. I will now hand over the hosting role for the panel to Claire.
Thanks, Colleen, and thanks everybody for being here today. What an exciting opportunity, and just really sincere congratulations to the KDE Hub for first of all, for the outstanding work that you've been doing over the past number of years, but for just a really stellar lineup yesterday and today. I must say I attended some of the breakout sessions earlier today, this morning, and was incredibly moved by what I heard and what's been accomplished by them. So the impact word in this panel, maximizing the impact of knowledge, we really heard some outstanding examples this morning. So congratulations on your work. I want to start by acknowledging with gratitude the lands that I live and work on, and those are the original lands of the Anishinaabe, the Cree, the Oji-Cree, the Dakota, and the Dene people, and the homeland of the Red River Métis Nation, otherwise known as Winnipeg. And we just had a little pre-session, and I said it's -15 here, but it's brilliantly sunny out, and that's one of the privileges of living here in the center of the country, center of Canada. We have a lot of sunshine, so it's lovely, that sunshine. So I'm thrilled to be moderating today's session, and I just want to say where I come from, that I am the Scientific Director for the National Collaborating Center for Determinants of Health, and that center is hosted by St. FX University, and it is located in Mi'kmaq, which is the ancestral and the unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people, in actually a small rural community in Nova Scotia called Antigonish. And our job, the National Collaborating Center for Determinants of Health, is one of 6 Public Health Agency of Canada funded knowledge translation centers. So in many ways, we consider ourselves a sister or brother center of the KDE Hub. We're also funded by the Public Health Agency of Canada and have been since post-SARS for about 15 years now. The 6 centers span across the country, and we have 3 main mandates, and they're really relevant to what we're talking about today. So I'm, as the scientific director of our center, but also as a public health practitioner for many decades now, very, very interested in what our panel and our guests have to say. And the 3 ways that we work across the 6 centers across the country are to identify knowledge gaps, and you'll hear that today, I know, in this panel. We foster networks amongst and between and with the community in terms of fostering networks where we can amplify knowledge and really looking to work towards that impact of knowledge. And then we also produce an array of evidence-informed resources and products and services, and have been doing so, all 6 of us, for 15 years now. And it's been a privilege to have that opportunity to work that way. So we have 4 panelists, and we are really looking to address that question about how do we maximize the impact of knowledge, of evidence, of what we know in the field of mental health promotion in particular. And some of the questions that came up for me as we were preparing for this panel is, when you talk about impact, people use that word impact, but how do you know when that impact has occurred? And as I mentioned, I attended one of the sessions this morning, and holy smokes, was there a lot of what I would classify as impact of the effort of those particular projects. So there's 4 speakers with us, and I'm going to call on each of them individually to take a look and to really answer that question about, what facilitates that use or impact of knowledge. What are maybe some of the barriers, but what are the ways that we can actually maximize that? And we're looking at leveraging momentum. And when you think about those words, leveraging momentum, that's about influencing or having the opportunity to actually take that foothold and move things forward. And I actually Googled momentum, and I love physics. It's part of, sort of my background and my history is physics. And, if something doesn't get in the way, then momentum just continues, right? If there's an object's in motion, then things just keep going. And there feels like there's a lot of momentum in this area, and a lot of momentum in this area as a result of these projects that we've heard about over the past 2 days. So Maya Gislason, I'm going to call on you first. Maya is an associate professor in the Faculty of Health Sciences at Simon Fraser University, so on the far west coast of our country, and she has a focus on health equity, which we share in the National Collaborating Center for Determinants of Health. She's a long-standing champion, we know that, of ecosystem approaches to health, and I don't think, Maya, there's ever been a time where your contributions are going to be more valued and more important. She looks to work upstream on public health issues. Many people talk about that, but how do we use that knowledge upstream to address that interconnection between human, animal, and ecosystem health? And she works alongside her colleagues and community partners, including the First Nations Health Authority. She's conducted research and developed tools on the impacts of climate change on diverse populations, and addressing environmental and community health impacts of intensive resource extraction on rural, remote, northern, and Indigenous communities in Canada. And the ultimate goal, of course, is that shared goal of planetary health, a word that we use we use a lot at the Collaborating Center, and I know will become more and more important. But I think, Maya, for this conversation, you have an emphasis on decolonizing knowledge creation and its mobilization. And I think we'd be really interested in your perspective on that, and how you get from theory to research to practice. So go ahead, Maya, with your opening comments.
Thank you so much, Claire. It's an honor to be here. And indeed, I'm coming to you from unceded Coast Salish territory. These lands were never surrendered, and the knowledge holders here, the Musqueam, the Squamish, the Tsleil-Waututh, the Coquitlam nations, where I am on top of Burnaby Mountain, are still active knowledge holders and land protectors. And so I learn all the time about what it means to be a good relation in this space as we try and work government to government to protect our health and well-being. So indeed, I'm a researcher, an academic, an educator, and I thought I would talk about um, what I understand to be my role in terms of building evidence that we can use to do evidence-informed policy and practice. And I've thought a lot about what is good evidence, and I want to share some of my thoughts with you here today. Being an eco-social health equity scholar and thinking a lot about health and well-being, including very much our mental health, I think a lot about how do we actually be planetary beings? How do we actually understand our projects within the context of planetary health and the planetary boundaries that we're working within? And so whether I'm working as a Michael Smith health researcher on children and climate and mental health, or with the Women in Health Research Institute, working particularly on women and girls in rural and remote settings, or on cumulative impacts of intensive resource extraction, I'm thinking a lot about what are the stories that are not yet being told? What are the silences in the data that need to be filled so that we can actually move very good evidence to inform very good practice? And so what I am trying to do in a sense is to move away from sort of treasuring what we already know how to measure and learn how to measure what we actually treasure. And part of that is treasuring the voices and experiences of people who are sovereignty seeking and equity seeking folks within the project of long-term sustainability. And I'm also really interested in trying to build evidence in a way that allows us to multi-solve, to solve more than one problem at the same time in the kind of name of sustainability, and to look for co-benefits. And as Claire said, to look for co-benefits so that when we do an intervention, it brings about, at least does no harm to human populations, ecological systems, or community environments, and to animals and kind of the kind of natural world. So I build teams to address complex issues, and they're transdisciplinary teams. So they're teams where we bring in kind of classic expertise, but we also work with traditional knowledge holders, people who sit in community, who have ancient wisdom, contemporary wisdom, and we bring this work together in order to often identify the silences in data and then listen to the stories of people. Think about how do we bring new kinds of knowledges into our analytical processes so that we can actually run models or do different kinds of recommendations where the voices of the living realities of people and the inequities, the experiences, and the insights they have on how to solve those issues as well are part of our data sets. And it's hard to do this work. It's hard to get people to slow down enough to do this work and to trust that working well, bringing the voices along with us that are excluded from a lot of our classic analytical processes will in fact empower us with the knowledge that we need to make better choices, to make smarter evidence-based decisions. And it's sometimes really difficult to do that within not only the difference between policy time and university time, where policy needs things to happen quite quickly and research can be a very slow process, but it's also hard to get a lot of academics or community members at the table because it is slow work, and it is sometimes it feels like people can't take the risk. Another challenge we have as academics when building these kinds of data sets is that the scholarship of discovery of primary research has been classically valued most in the university. And so I argue a lot for Boyer's notions of scholarship, where we need to value the scholarship of discovery, but also the scholarship of integration, of working interdisciplinarily, the scholarship of application, so moving knowledge to action, scholarship of teaching and learning, but also very much now the scholarship of engagement. And as the university is growing, it's starting to support this work much more. And so I think a lot about not only how we share, but also what we share. And I do this really by trying to bring sort of a bottom-up approach to knowledge building so that our top-down solutions are much stronger. So, and the last thing I'll say is I do this very much with youth, for youth, and by youth, with an eye to intergenerational equity and justice, so that we're accountable to solving problems not only now, but to the future as well. So thank you.
There's a lot in what you just said, and a lot for your colleagues on the panel to build on. What struck me is that thoughtfulness, and Maya, that also takes time, right? To find that space, carve that space, to be thoughtful in how you approach all of these different topics. So yeah, well done. I'm going to move now to Stephanie, and Stephanie, you sit Stephanie Priest, and she sits in a different piece, and it's interesting when Maya talked about bottom up, so the top down policies can occur. So Stephanie Priest is the Director General of the new Centre for Mental Health and Wellbeing at the Public Health Agency of Canada. So congratulations, that's a great role and a great center, I think, at this point in time in our history. And that center provides public health leadership on mental health promotion, suicide prevention, prevention of substance-related harms, family and gender-based violence prevention, and supports mental health for those most affected by the COVID-19 pandemic, and probably are still, I know, being impacted or affected by that pandemic. The vision for that center, for which Stephanie is the Director General, is to help foster environments that support mental health and prevent mental illness. And again, from this morning, we heard some really good ideas about that, including programs that are focused on reducing health inequities and health inequalities by taking a focus on the well-being and promoting the mental health of children, youth, and families. And Stephanie, you've had a lot of experience, more than a couple of decades, in that space of health policy development. And we know, Maya talked about structural. We know that policy and policy interventions, if you will, are how and where we're going to be able to get at those solutions. You've had an extensive career in leadership and management, but also in healthcare systems. So we're really excited to hear from you as you bring that policy perspective into this conversation and how you consider the impact of knowledge or evidence in that policy cycle that you're right in the middle of. So over to you, Stephanie.
Thank you, Claire. I have been looking forward to this panel all week, I have to say, and I'm really excited to be here. I'm joining you from the unceded territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe people here in Ottawa. And interestingly, as I was doing a little bit of my own journey and learnings about the Algonquin people, I learned that Ottawa in Algonquin means to trade. And I think that's very apropos for what we're going to be talking about today, because I think at its core, this is also about trading our knowledge, our experiences, and our expertise. C'est un réel plaisir de me joindre à vous aujourd'hui pour vous partager mon point de vue et mes réflexions sur la façon dont nous passons de la connaissance à l'action. So to prepare for the discussion today, I reflected on a few things, and one of the things is about knowledge. So how do we generate knowledge? How is it shared? Can we trust it? That's something that's come up occasionally, and these may be things you're thinking about too. And as I think about my answers to those questions, which, by the way, don't have the perfect answer for any of those questions, which is partially why we're all here, I start with where I sit in the system. And Claire gave a very nice introduction to me and to the work of our system. But our perspectives have really evolved over close to 13 years working in population mental health at the Public Health Agency of Canada. And my role and my team's role has changed through those years as well. Nothing stands still, which made me think of your definition, Claire, of momentum and sort of like that continuous change. And I want to continue to reflect on that through our discussion today. So this has led me to my current role within the center, the newly created Center for Mental Health and Wellbeing at the agency. And frankly, the very privileged place and position that my team and I sit in as federal government public servants. We're able to help connect grassroots organizations, local leaders, knowledge holders, and support translation of knowledge, research practice, and help shape our policies. And that privilege is really not lost on us as we do our work in our policy development at the federal level. So what are some of the facilitators to that? How do we make that happen? What are some of the barriers? I actually was thinking about the KDE Hub Symposium last year, and I was struck by the opportunities there to share, learn, and translate knowledge. And I see the same thing this year, perhaps with even greater participation, broader knowledge, and different experiences, and that's exciting. So how do we keep that momentum going? There are also opportunities, I think, to bring the lessons from communities into our policy sphere. And that's includes, I think, a growing awareness of mental health promotion, but it's not just awareness. And I have to apologize that every now and then in my office, the lights go out and it gets spooky. So just a second, I'm going to do something, a little exercise here to get the lights to work. There we go. Sorry, folks. It's just a life in the office. So yeah, I was talking about awareness and understanding. And that they're not the same thing, particularly for mental health promotion. I think that's one of the barriers. And I think it's an opportunity with events like these and the things that happen between these events on how we build that common understanding. And I think that's a big facilitator. Cette sensibilisation croissante à la promotion de la santé mentale et à ses conséquences sur le bien-être est illustrée par la réalisation et le partenariat de projets financés par le Fonds d'innovation pour la promotion de la santé mentale. Elle se reflète également dans les ressources allouées au développement du volet santé mentale COVID, qui soutient les personnes touchées de manière disproportionnée par la pandémie et les conditions préexistantes exacerbées. And I propose, and this is no surprise, I think all of us have talked about this for several years now, that the COVID-19 pandemic was certainly a tipping point for many things. But I would also suggest it's a tipping point for building our integrated connections in understanding research, practice, and policy, because we were forced to come together, quite frankly, and it required us to look at gaps and cracks in our system that were always there, but that we had to start to look at to see what we could do to address them. And we're seeing that in the agency and across government, in my opinion. We have a Minister for Mental Health and Addictions now. We've increased our visibility for mental health, including promotion and prevention, with the creation of our new Center for Mental Health and Wellbeing. These are opportunities for us. And to date, we're still seeing the impacts of the pandemic. And as you well know, pre-existing conditions have worsened for many. But as we reflect on this, I believe we can also be proud of the ongoing work and knowledge sharing that is continuing. And I'm actually quite confident that we can and need to collectively use these learnings as we grapple with what I call and others wicked problems that are before us, such as climate change. From a funder perspective, we're seeing innovations that have occurred, like the hybrid delivery model, combining in-person and online delivery, and that has the potential to expand reach of our programs. These are positive shifts in the way in which we administer and support the delivery of our programs, but there's more work that needs to be done. And we're here today, and with it, the day-to-day work that we have underway with projects and communities to learn and to continue to work together. Le défi consiste à intégrer ces évidences dans nos programmes et politiques. We need to think about our mindsets, in my view. And I'm going to quote Dan Heath in his book, Upstream. It's a great book if any of you would like to read it. And he says, we've got to shift our mindset of, quote, scaling a specific program by reproducing it faithfully, to owning a problem and adapting a program as needed to achieve results. I think this is where mobilizing the knowledge and leveraging the momentum that we have becomes critical, in my view. So I'll leave you with maybe 2 barriers and 2 facilitators that we can talk more about, and I'm sure not surprising to any of you. The first one is, why are we still siloed? And what are the enablers to that? Breaking down those silos. I think meaningful and authentic partnerships is a real enabler and can help to include and to build and continue to build our momentum. And we're seeing some of that today. And in fact, what we heard from Maya just a few moments ago is these partnerships and work takes time. So that's a barrier perhaps, or maybe it's just an important consideration when we do our planning for programming and policy. And then finally, I think an innovation and facilitator is about local action. And really, and I'm saying this as somebody that is probably, many of you might think, is pretty far away from local action in the federal government, despite the fact that we in public health are funding some of those actions. But local action and fostering local change, I think, is part of the solution. And we've seen that in some of our programming, whether it be through the Innovation Fund or Family and Gender-Based Violence programming or other programming, how important that is, how that can embed equity and trauma-informed practices and culture more effectively. So I think there are those great opportunities. I'm here in sum, I guess, to learn from all of you and see if there are ways in which we can leverage our work together with the KD&E Hub and others around the table. Merci beaucoup.
Thanks, Stephanie, and thanks for your message of hope. And coming from the federal government in March of 2023, I really appreciate that message of hope and that we can actually support that momentum and leverage it, influence it as we can. And, you've just opened a beautiful opportunity for our next panelist, John Reeves, because he's right now working at that local level and at that local action. So I think he can pick up on that really nicely. So John, welcome. Hello. John is the Executive Director of Hull Services, which is an agency that provides mental health services to youth, children, and families in Calgary, Alberta. So pretty local. John brings, again, we have, probably 100 years of experience across this panel or more. But he's worked at all those levels, from the local and that direct service or frontline or point of care perspective, all the way to being an assistant deputy minister in the government of Alberta, so another part of our country. And John's expertise, and I think the perspective that I'm really interested for him to bring today, is actually using research, using best practice, using evidence and information to develop and implement practice that is outcome or impact, which is the name of our impact of knowledge focused. So John, I think you can sort of pick up on that word impact or outcome and help us to think about how we use research and data to enhance practice in mental health promotion. And I think might be able to even bring that really human experience and that local experience to our conversation. So over to you, John.
Thank you. And I appreciate the time to meet and chat about this very important issue. I need to acknowledge that I'm on the ancestral lands of the Blackfoot Confederation, which has Siksika, Kainai, Piikani, and the Blackfeet of Montana. This extends from North Saskatchewan River down to Yellowstone River in Montana, from the Rocky Mountains into Saskatchewan. It's also the home of Métis Region 3 and all the people who now make Southern Alberta their home. So I thought I would talk a bit about applying research and knowledge to practice. And I have sort of 2 examples to talk about. One is in my role in government in children's services, where I was overseeing children's services for a number of years and taking some of the evidence and data and trying to shape the practice, day-to-day practice of staff and caregivers to address the mental health concerns of infants, children, and youth that we served. So fundamentally, I want to start by saying, I think we're now at a time in the world where there's enough evidence and knowledge that we can change a generation of children, infants, and youth. And I think we need to latch on to that. And really, we need to look at how do we get the skill, and I think the skill is there. Do we have the will? How do we promote the will in organizations? And then do we have the capacity, meaning the resources to do that? My focus generally is on capacity. Do we have the right staff, the right funding, the right money? I'm going to talk a little bit about how we implemented a social policy change within children's services in the government. And basically that was through doing a couple things. One was looking at the knowledge around the impacts of trauma on infants, children, and youth, and developing a framework that we could use for all caregivers within our ministry. So that went from parents at home to foster parents, to adoptive parents, to people who provide services to group care. And we developed, because when we looked at the research, how do you change trajectory? How do you improve service? And it was really clear that to do that, people who implemented frameworks of practice based on values, tools and techniques, and measured their outcomes were successful. So we developed, from our perspective, what we called the Foundations of Caregiver Support, social policy that looked at 4 areas that ingrained that practice piece down into the caregiver level. So we trained, coached, and mentored many people, probably about 20,000 people, around this document called Foundations of Caregiver Support. And it addressed 4 key issues. Indigenous trauma and grief and loss, so the impacts of residential school, ongoing impacts of colonialization. We looked at child and adolescent development, understanding that, and we looked at trauma, so the impacts of toxic stress and how we believe the children we worked with were impacted and had developmental trauma in their lives. And then of course, loss and grief, because they're entering our system and there is trauma created by that and loss and grief through that. And what we did is we embedded that approach in our contracting and in our service delivery model. And then we looked at, over time, was there changes? We embedded that also in our agency delivery, of which Hall Services was one of those. So I'm going to talk a bit about how Hall, through the Foundations of Caregiver Support, implemented that at the practice level, directly delivering mental health services to children and families, went about doing that. And what they did is they implemented a practice framework too. And they used a basic skill-driven work of Dr. Bruce Perry, so the neurosequential model of therapeutics. And what that did in the service delivery at Hall, because we deliver services from at home all the way to congregate care and in between, so foster care, kinship care, group care, we had a foundational glue, we'll call it, that brought our view of trauma, but also brought, through policy and through practice, how we can make a difference. And we implemented that with other evidence-based approaches, specifically therapeutic approaches, cognitive behavioral therapy, dialectic behavioral therapy. We do a number of therapeutic approaches through our psychologists attached to programs. We also, at that point, measured the outcomes. And through the measuring safety, well-being, permanency, and family and community connections, we were able to understand how well we were doing and where we needed to emphasize our capacity or our resources to improve the lives of those children. So the barriers around that, of course, or the obstacles, is you need to have committed, firm leadership over time, because this took 10 years to do. It's not something you can do in a couple of years. And that leadership needs to stay and follow that through. The second piece is you have to help and coach and mentor your staff that are going to do the day-to-day work and show them the evidence and data that they are making a difference. Then they're motivated, and we see